Hello everyone, this is Prem Kumar. In this video, we are going to talk about rule sets in Pega. We are going to look into the different configurations of rule set, and we will also talk about the rule set validation mode. Let's get started. So the first question is, what is the purpose of rule set in Pega? We already saw during the application creation video, we know that rule sets can be tagged to the applications. So one application should have at least one rule set, but in real time, it can have multiple rule sets that are part of the application. In the last video, we created our first rule, and those rules should go under the rule set. So what is the purpose of this rule set? The first main purpose is it helps to package the rules. As you know, rules equal to source code in Pega, and this source code should be shipped across environments, and then finally it should go to production. So these rules should be packaged, right? Like a jar, it should be packaged, and rule set help to group and package the rules. Almost all of the rules which you are going to see here is going to be tagged to some rule set. And remember, rule set can have a lot of versions defined. For example, Climbs app can be a rule set and it can hold a lot of versions. You can keep increment the patch version or you can increment the minor version. It means it can be 01, 01, 01. And when you want to do new changes, you can increment to 01, 01, 02 and you can keep on incrementing. So rule set is the out of the box version controlling for Pega coding. By this way, rule set provides a version control for our Pega rules. The next main purpose is it helps to secure the rules. You can lock a rule set so that no one can update the rule set. So once you develop or complete your changes, you can package the rules into the rule set and then you can lock the rule set. You can also lock each individual versions of a rule set. It means you can lock all the lower versions of the rule set and keep the higher version open on which you can continue with your development. Not only locking the rule set, you can also enable the checkout on the rule set. Checkout, what I refer here is one of a development action. So if you want to do some kind of rule changes, the first thing what you will be doing is you have to check out the rule and then you do the change and then post that you can check in the rule. In the next video, we are going to see all about these developer actions like checkout, check-in, private checkout, everything in the next video. For now, just understand that you can also configure checkout feature for a rule set, and this checkout feature we already saw in the operator rule form. We can also configure if that operator can have the enable checkout feature. And we also know that end users, we will disable that option so that end user, they don't want to code. So rule set, it helps to package, it can manage the version control, it can also secure your rules. And the final main purpose is it can also do some kind of design time validation. There are two types of validation, application validation and rule set validation. It can invoke both these type of validation. So what do you mean by design time validation? There can be two kind of error which you get normally. It can be design time error or runtime error. Design time error is at the time of development. When you develop some source code and if you miss some syntax or if you do some kind of wrong coding, that can be design time error. Pega software can notify you saying that there is some kind of design time error. Runtime error is when the application runs in a production and if there is some kind of error, it can be referred as runtime error. And rule set validation helps to solve these design time errors. I have to explain these two types of design time validation briefly. Let's check it out. There are two types as I told. It's an application validation and a rule set validation. So before going into this validation mode, let's start with the application layer or the situation layer cake. We already know how we defined the situation layer cake for our current application. We have the Pega platform as the base layer. We created an implementation layer over the base layer. Then we also created a branch application layer over the implementation application layer. So these layers can be considered as an application layers. We know that applications can hold rule sets, right? And we created 4 rule sets into the implementation layer. Now if I cut the cake, I can get 4 slices in the implementation layer that can correspond to 4 rule set. And in the development application, I have only one rule set, so I'm not going to cut it as slice. I'm going to have it as a single piece as a development rule set. Okay, now that we have 5 rule set in our stack, development rule set which is at the top and 4 other rule sets which is in the implementation layer. Now let's say we want to do some kind of source code development or rule development. We want our source code into the Climbs app. And we also know that source code can refer different source code. What I mean here is activity rule can call another activity rule. So how do you manage these dependent rules? It means activity A is calling activity B. Should both these activity rules stay in the same rule set, or it can be in a different rule set? If I say both should always be in the same rule set, it's like a kind of restriction, right? You cannot have that in real time. You need to have different flavors under different layers, right? So how does this validation works? What if my dependent activity does not exist in the system? To solve all these, Pega uses the design time validation in the rule set. The first option is application validation. In application validation, one rule, the activity A, it can refer the other rule, activity B, if that activity is in the same layer or the below layer. It means if I have an activity in the climbs app rule set and I want to call another activity which is in the climbs int rule set, then it is possible if climbs app rule set is configured as application validation. Similarly, climbs app can also call or invoke rules that comes with the out of the box layer because those layers are below the climbs app layer. Now the next point is you cannot have the dependent rule in the above layer. It means an activity which is in the climbs app rule set cannot call an activity which is in the branch application layer because that activity is staying at the top. This is because you know the principle of situation layer cake. All your reusable code should be at the below layer and you will keep building rules over the top layer that can reuse the rules at the same layer or at the below layer. So this is what about the application validation. So just remember, in application validation, you can refer rules only at the same layer. It can be on any rule set on the same layer. It means climbs app can invoke rules from alive int, climbs app itself and climbs app int. But it cannot refer rules from the development rule set which is at the very top. But it can refer rules from the same layer or at the below layer. Most of the rule sets which Pega creates, it marks it as application validation, and I would also recommend to have it marked as an application validation. Then where comes this rule set validation? The main difference between rule set validation and application validation is rule set validation, you have to specify the dependency rule set. It means if alive it wants to use some rules from climbs app, then definitely in the alive rule set, you have to define the dependency as climbs app so that you can reuse the rule. If you don't specify the dependency, then the design time validation will fail. You cannot use the rules from any other rule set. So rule set validation is kind of against the application layering. If you want to use a rule from different rule sets, definitely you have to specify those rule sets as a dependency or prerequisite to the calling rule set. So what can be a business use case for this rule set validation? Definitely the organizational rule sets can be the right business use case for this rule set validation. As I already told you, organizational rule sets can hold all the reusable codes, right? So these organizational rule sets can be reused across different implementation applications. Now let's say I have an organizational rule set. There is an activity into the organizational rule set, and that is referring code from climbs app rule set. Okay. Now if I want to plug this organizational rule set and paste it into different implementation application, which is not climbs, it means the climbs rule will not be visible to this organizational rule, right? Because it is into a different stack. So by this way, if any rule set that can be reused across applications, and if it has some dependency with different rule sets, then definitely you should mark it as rule set validation and specify the dependencies in the rule set. Ideally, in kind of some component rule set, you will have all the rules within the same rule set. If you have dependency with different rule sets, then you can mark it as rule set validation. I have worked in projects where we don't use this rule set validation actually. So what we do is we create an application layer for enterprise and then put all the rule sets that are part of the enterprise related into that layer. So every rule set will be marked it as application validation so that it can reuse all the rules on the same layer. Okay, now enough of introduction. Let's get practical and see the rule set configuration. Okay, here I have logged in into the development server and my current application is climbs app branch. I have just opened that application, and that application is built over the climbs application, which is the implementation layer. And the branch application, it holds only one rule set, the development rule set, And the clients app application layer, they have 4 slices of cake. They have 4 rule sets here: clients app int, alive and alive int. Okay, now let's open the rule set clients app and check out the configurations of a rule set. The first thing is they have 3 main tabs. They have versions, security and category. On the versions, there is a validation mode. As we saw in the introduction, we know there are 2 types of validation mode: application validation and rule set validation. I'm going to explain it little bit at the end. Let's check the other configurations before. You can also find the rules that are packaged within this rule set. There are around 23 rules. And you see there are 2 versions: 010101, 010102. We use this higher version during the branch merging video where we merged and created a new version. So how to create a new version is, you can always go ahead and manually add a new version here, saying that it can be 010103, which is the next highest patch version. And Pega also can automatically create a new version when you use the branch merging wizard. If you want to know more about branch merging, you can find the link where you can navigate to the branch merging video. So next, what are the actions you can do in a rule set version? If it is already locked, then you can unlock and save the version. The other way around, if it is unlocked, then you can lock and save it. You can also delete the rule set versions if there is no rules found. You see here, there are 13 rules found, so you will not have the delete option as enabled. To do that, there are other ways where you can refactor or delete rule set, or if you want, you can manually delete all these rules and finally you can delete this rule set version. Once all these rule set versions are deleted, then you can delete the rule set if you want as a whole. Here there are other configurations that helps to audit or track the history. You can say effective start date of this rule set version. You can also check the history of this rule set version. Now we know that rule set can help with packaging and version controlling. The next is about the security. You can configure password for a rule set so that if someone wants to update this rule set, then they have to enter the password. Otherwise, they will not be allowed to update this rule set. This is one. You can also control it in a more granular way by defining password for individual action. For example, if you want to add a new rule set version, then you can control it with a password. If you want to update a rule set version, you can control. If you want to update this entire rule set, you can also control. So this is like a granular way of using the password. Also, you can use this use checkout option. Pega by default, when it creates a new application, it will not enable this option in the rule set, but going forward when you start developing with the different team members, ideally you should be enabling this. So I will use this option, use checkout. Once I use this option, then I will have that checkout check-in functionality. We are going to see it in the next video. So let's move ahead. So under this security tab, you can configure or you can secure your rule set. There is another tab, category, where you can define the category of your rule set. There are 3 rule set types. It can be standard, it can be component rule set, it can be shared rule set. This is like kind of an advanced concept, which I'm going to make a separate video in the advanced Pega concepts playlist. For this beginner video, I'm not going to explain much in detail. You can also a little bit browse on it if you want. The next is automation settings. Rule set can also hold the test cases. In Pega, you can write unit test cases. That is also a rule in Pega, and those rules should go under rule set. So if you want to mark this rule set to hold only the unit test cases, then definitely this is a mandatory prerequisite to mark the rule set to hold the test cases. Currently, this rule set is not going to hold any test cases, so I'm not going to enable this option. Now that we checked all the rule configurations, we left only one configuration, that is on validation mode. There are 2 types of validation: application validation, rule set validation. Now I'm going to explain you. To explain this, I created 3 activities. There are 3 activities. One on the branch activity, that is in the development rule set, that is at the very top. Next is the clients app activity, that is at the clients app rule set, which is the implementation rule set. And alive activity, which is at the alive rule set, which is the organizational rule set. Now let's go to the clients app rule set and check the validation mode first. It is configured as application validation. I hope you remember what is application validation. In application validation, rules can refer the rules on the same layer or the below layer. Now I will go to the activity which is in the clients app and try to refer rule which is at the top layer. So branch activity, I'm going to call this activity. In an activity, you can use the call method to refer another activity. As you save, you found that the validation mode has failed and it threw the error. So this is like a design time validation fail because you cannot refer a rule which is at the top layer. Now if I go to branch activity, which is already at the top layer, it can refer the rules on the same layer or the below layer, and implementation is below layer, right? Now if I use the call, I'm going to first check out, and then if I use call and I will copy this activity name, I want to call this activity. So definitely this will allow me to save this rule because the activity is below the layer, so that it can refer the activity which is below the layer. Okay, so this is all about application validation. Development rule set is also configured as application validation. That is why it allowed to save. If it is configured as rule set validation, then definitely you have to specify the prerequisites for this rule set. Pega, during the application creation, it marked all the organizational rule sets as rule set validation. Now let's open the A-Life rule set. If you go to the A-Life rule set, there you can see it is marked as rule set validation. If you mark it as rule set validation, then you will get another field here asking required rule sets. It can be the dependent or the prerequisite rule sets. Currently, A-Life, which is the organizational rule set, it has a prerequisite rule set of A-Life int. And let's open this A-Life int rule set. A-Life int, again, this is also organizational integration rule set, and definitely this is going to be rule set validation. And you see here the required rule set is Pega process commander 080799. 0807 because I'm using the personal edition 8.7. 99 is the maximum patch version which you can use. So the main takeaway point here is, if you want to mark any rule set as rule set validation, and currently if it doesn't have any dependent code in a different rule set, then what you can do is, under required rule sets, you can mark it the Pega's out of the box rule set, Pega process commander, and then you can specify the maximum version there. Whenever you mark any rule set as type rule set validation mode, then you should have at least one required rule set. If I delete this rule set and then try to do a save, it's going to fail, saying that you need to have at least one prerequisite rule set. So for now, I'm going to just refresh so that the save is revoked. Currently my A-Life, it has only A-Life int as a prerequisite. Now, if I go to this A-Life activity, which is under the A-Life rule set, and if I try to call activity which is in the same layer, I'm going to call claims app activity. Though it is in the same layer, claims app rule set is not defined as a prerequisite, right? So if I do a save, definitely it will fail, saying that validation mode has failed. The same will be account for the branch activity. If I go to branch activity here, and then if I try to call the branch activity, which is at the very above layer, and development rule set is not a prerequisite for A-Life, so definitely this is going to fail. Now I will do a small change. Now let's say I want to reuse the rules from the development rule set. So always A-Life will have a dependency with the development rule set. So what I can do is, I can go to this rule set and I can say A-Life int can be a dependent rule set. I can also say development as a dependent rule set. I will say I need 010101. This is a dependent rule set. If I do a save, now the dependency stack is updated. Once this gets saved, let's go to the activity, A-Life activity. Now if you do a save, still it doesn't accept. What can be the reason? The reason is development is above the layer. Whatever rule set validation mode you take, if a rule is at the very bottom layer, it cannot refer a rule at the top layer. Now let's do one thing. Let's go to the A-Life rule set again and remove this development and mark this claims app rule set as a dependent rule set. Now I will change this A-Life prerequisite and say 010101. Now I will save this. Now if you come back to A-Life activity and try to refer the claims app activity, which stays in the claims app rule set, which is a dependency or a prerequisite to this A-Life rule set, and so it can refer the rules from the dependent rule set. So this is how validation mode is going to work. Again, I am reiterating my point. You don't want to mark all these organizational rule sets as rule set validation. Instead, you can create an application layer for the organization and then mark all the rule set to have application validation. I hope now you understood the difference between the rule set validation and application validation. Still, if you have some doubt about this rule set and application validation, please leave a comment below this video and I will be there to answer for it. In the next video in this playlist, we are going to talk about the check-in, checkout, private checkout and the different actions which a developer can do. See you there.